Okay, welcome everybody. Today we're going to be doing making the handoff into college and university. So I'm very excited about this. This is kind of a big topic that comes up a lot, especially when we get to that end of that high school zone. And so yeah, this has been kind of one thing that we've had in the works for a while of talking. So I'm very excited to have our guest today. First up, we've got Kurt Downs from Border City AC. We've got Tony Sharpe, Olympian from the Speed Academy, and we've got Brett Montrose from Streamline Athletes. Uh, Before we get to their introductions, I just want to let everyone know that you're all muted. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat bar. Behind the scenes is John LaFranco, the coaching manager. So he'll be able to direct everything to me throughout this. And we're going to give about how this will basically work is we're going to have a nice little slideshow going with Brett. He's going to introduce everything and kind of go through it all. And then we're going to have a little bit of panel discussion. And then there'll be some time at the end for some audience questions. So please pump away. If you have questions throughout, absolutely, we'll get to them. We are going to record this at the end, so it will be available on YouTube on our AC channel. And then everyone here tonight is going to get an NCCP point, PD point for maintenance of certification. So yeah, let's get going. We'll get our panelists to introduce themselves if you like. Kurt, do you want to go first?
Hey everybody, Kurt Downs, president and head coach at Border City Athletics Club. I think I'm in my 22nd year or 23rd year of coaching now. Speed power coach, mid distance, combined events, and I'm here in Windsor. And I've had the good fortune of being able to send quite a few kids to university, both here in Canada and as well as to the US.
All right. Yes, thank you. This has been good. You've been on plenty of teams. You've sent quite a few athletes. You've had a lot through the program. Tony, did you want to go next?
Yes, Tony Sharpe, based in Pickering, Ontario, former Olympian, Olympic medalist, all that athletic stuff. Moved into coaching in 2006, where I founded the Speed Academy Athletics Club in Pickering here locally. Over the last 18 years, we've produced a number of national team members, obviously Andre DeGrasse being probably your biggest title. And in recent years, you've heard of Christopher Morales along those lines. We've had up to 11, 12 kids on national teams in 1 year in the various age classes. But ideally, we're focused on really trying to help these kids leverage this athletic ability for academic gain. So as a result of that, I've become very familiar with the entire NCAA process and recruitment process over the last 10 or 12 years. And we've probably placed near 100 kids in the system over the last decade into the NCAA, ranging from Division II to Power Five scholarships. So as I said, I think I've learned a lot along the way, and I'm happy to share that information with anyone.
Fantastic. This is what we want. Brett, can you go next?
Sure thing. Thanks, Kyle. Good to be here with everybody. Thanks for having me tonight. My slides are going to take care of my introduction, but I'm Brett. I am one of our founders and co-CEOs at Streamline Athletes, and we are a Canadian company that supports high school aged track and field student athletes with the recruitment process to the collegiate level. We'll get into more details shortly.
All right, this is awesome. So you can see we've got wealth of knowledge here. I'm really excited for this. I know this was me going through the university system, going through high school and leading up to it, just the confusion I had with it all, and the uncertainty and second guessing my choices, everything throughout, not knowing what to do. So I think this is very valuable for our coaches, very valuable for our athletes. So I'm really excited, and parents, absolutely. So yeah, Brett, I think you have the ability to share. You ready to do your part first? Awesome. Yep, we can see it.
All right, we'll jump into it here. So first, we'll start with a little bit about who we are at Streamline Athletes and go from here. So we are, like I mentioned, a collegiate track and field and cross country recruitment platform. We've been in the field of doing this since around 2017. We support the recruitment journeys of athletes, and then we also work hands-on with collegiate coaches to support their recruitment. Generally, at a very high level, our mission here at Streamline Athletes is to reveal opportunities for all athletes so that they can move forward as confident and inspired individuals in their lives. So we really take a holistic approach to recruitment and understand that the university step is an important one in the life of a student athlete. As for me and what I do at the company, I provide one-on-one recruitment advisory to student athletes and their families. I also work with collegiate coaches for solution finding to help them identify the right athletes for their programs, and generally looking on centralizing that information. I think a lot of what we'll discuss today, and I think even what Tony alluded to as we were chatting before the presentation, a lot of the difficulty with recruitment comes from centralizing information. So parents and athletes having certain expectations, collegiate coaches having certain expectations, the high school and club coaches who are supporting those athletes having expectations based on their own experiences, and then finding the middle ground to find the best solution for not only all parties, but the student athlete who's at the center of it all. My background is track and field. So I grew up on Vancouver Island on the West Coast. I was a 400 and 800 meter runner in high school, and that carried me to Simon Fraser University, where I competed between 2009 and 2014. And it happened to be during our transition from the NAIA into the NCAA. So very unique experience for me being in the NAIA, NCAA, but at a Canadian school. So that's my background. From there, moved into some technology companies, specifically in education recruitment, before founding Streamline Athletes in 2017. So let's jump into it. This is a presentation that perhaps some attendees here may have seen a version of before. If you haven't, I'm going to be going through these slides pretty quickly today to try and keep us on time. So if you have questions, let's hold on to them and we'll get to them at the end. We'll start with the recruitment landscape. So I think the most important point to make here is that almost every single time that we talk about the size of the landscape with student athletes and parents, they're surprised to learn that it's so much larger than they'd expect. There's hundreds of junior colleges. There's the entire NCAA system, which is composed of 3 different divisions. As you can see on the screen, each one with hundreds of programs inside just that division. And then we have our Canadian schools as well. So the most important takeaway here is that there is an opportunity for everybody, whether you're walking on to a small junior college program or you're earning a scholarship to a USports or NCAA Division I program. So if you're a high school coach supporting student athletes, it's not just your tier 1 5-star recruits who have college opportunities. Probably a lot of them do. And the most important thing there is going to be their passion and love for the sport and a desire to continue doing it beyond high school. So quick summary here, 1,700 plus programs, 351 or so in the NCAA D1, 300 in D2, and over 400 in Division III. There's also the NAIA, which is another US-based association that has over 200 programs there. USports, we hover around the 46 school mark. CCAA, also Canadian, for 2-year programs for the most part. There's about 60 schools in there. Important to note that some of those schools are cross-country only programs. Not all of them offer track and field. Actually, in fact, I think most of them are cross-country only programs. And then lastly, we've got junior colleges, which includes the NJCAA, as well as other junior college associations in the United States. These are 2-year programs, and there's hundreds of schools there as well. Tony can probably speak to that due to Andre's journey through junior college at Coffeyville before he arrived in California in the NCAA. So that's the landscape, very quick flyover. I wanted to zoom in a little bit more on USports today, just because I think so often we're tempted to talk about and focus on the NCAA, but being Canadian student athletes and families here, I think it's important just to understand the landscape that we have in our own backyard a little bit deeper as well. Within USports, we're mostly focused on Canadian four-year universities. These schools and track and field / cross country programs exist across the country, from the West Coast, where I'm speaking to you from today, all the way out to the East Coast, where Kyle is. They exist in 4 different conferences. So Canada West, Ontario, the RSEQ in Quebec, and the AUS in the Atlantic provinces, all combined to make up USports. If you haven't been in touch with Canadian University Track and Field in a few years, you might remember that USports in English was referred to as CIS not too long ago, and that's now USports. So we're talking about former CIS when we refer to USports. USports does have scholarship availability. There are sanctioned cross-country and indoor track and field seasons. I don't like giving blanket statements to NCAA versus USports or American schools versus Canadian schools, but some Canadian programs, some USports programs may be more focused on individual athlete development than some stateside programs. What I mean by this is that there tends to be a little bit more coach turnover in the NCAA, and titles are really important in the NCAA. However, this does not apply to all schools, and this is not to say that NCAA coaches are not focused on individual athlete development, because they are as well. Ton of good academic institutions in Canada that belong to USports, including some high globally ranked universities like Simon Fraser University, where I went, UBC also out here, a bunch in Ontario like the U of T. These are all part of the USports program, and often can be really good academic options for student athletes who are looking for a Canadian education, especially if they're Canadian student athletes. All right, now we're going to talk scholarships a little bit, which can often occupy a lot of time. Again, if you have questions, we can get to them, and this is pretty high level stuff. But generally, there's 2 types of scholarships that student athletes can earn when they enter college or university, being athletic and academic. I think it's really important to note that full ride athletic scholarships, as the rules are set currently, are rare to the NCAA. D1 and D2 programs do have scholarship limitations. Right now that's set at 18 and 12-ish, but for future recruiting cycles, that's subject to change, in line with the roster limitations that are subject to change in the near future as well for the next recruiting cycle. Really important to note that Division III programs do not offer athletic scholarship, so you can't earn athletic-based scholarships for Division III programs, but they can offer academic scholarships. That said, D1 and D2 programs, you can often stack athletic aid and academic aid. So athletic scholarship availability is not the end all be all if your grades are solid. So we'll get more into the academic side of things shortly. Just to contextualize a little bit, we have a lot of data on this, and these are just examples, but some top Division I program scholarship conversations might not even start using the 800 meter as an example on the men's side until the athlete's running a 150. So really fast for a high school athlete, and that just contextualizes how hard it can be to earn a scholarship to a school like Georgia or Florida or Texas or Arkansas. And then Division II programs, using the same event as an example, those can even be as fast as a 152 or 153. So this isn't meant to say your athletes can't go D1 or go D2, but full ride or even partial athletic scholarships may not be available. Academics can really help those Division I and II opportunities. Or let's take a look at what's available in USports, NAIA, Division III, junior college, depending on the athlete's situation. That's when that whole landscape comes into play and can be really important to find opportunities for athletes at all levels of the sport and all standings in terms of academics. Athletic scholarship decisions are made by the program's coaching staff. They have a budget that they have to work within, and they have the ability to do that. I think, Tony, you mentioned this before we hopped on the call as well, that a lot of the time athletes and parents are under the impression that collegiate coaches can just invent last-minute scholarships. That's not the case. They don't come out of thin air. We need to time our conversations properly and understand what schools we should be talking to. And I think high school coaches can play a big role in supporting athletes to have conversations with the right college coaches. Next, academic scholarships, super powerful tool to augment your financial situation. And it could be as important in a lot of conversations as your performances on the track or the long jump pit or the hammer cage. Good grades can go a really long way. And it can also be a good way to explain your financial situation as a student athlete to a collegiate coach and start the conversation around scholarships. Hey, coach, are academic scholarships available at Oregon? Is a much easier ask than how much am I worth in terms of your athletic scholarship budget? Because now the seed's planted and the coach can help you figure out your budget situation. Lastly, Canadian schools might be more limited when it comes to the dollars that they can offer in terms of scholarships. You're not going to see a $50,000 scholarship to a Canadian university, but that's because $50,000 tuition doesn't exist at Canadian universities for Canadian student athletes, at least when it comes to the public schools. So it's really important to keep in mind that a small scholarship at a Canadian school, a USports school, could be a less expensive experience for the family than a 50% scholarship to an American school, especially a US private school. So just important to keep in mind. We'll talk about how collegiate coaches conduct their recruiting now. Here, I'm not going to go into too much detail, and I will send these slides out to Kyle to distribute to all the attendees afterwards. But almost all the time, unless we're talking about Ivy League schools, it starts with athletic standards and then moves into academic standards. So first, do you meet walk-on or scholarship standards that we have set at the program? Next, do you have the GPA or the average percentage that would be required to be accepted into the university? Next, conversations can be sparked in two different ways. Either the coach at the college or university is contacting the athlete, or the athlete is contacting the coach at the college or university. At Streamline Athletes, we can support conversations that go in both ways, and I'll go into more detail there. For American coaches, the athlete's budget is often very important. And then lastly, I think this one is a very important point for high school and club coaches who are working with our Canadian student athletes. Your personality and your intangibles do make a difference. I talk to college and university coaches all the time, and they will make decisions to give athletes who they think will be coachable, good teammates, good people, good academics, opportunities over athletes who might be running a half second faster in a certain event, because that they'll just be a better fit for that program. So I think as leaders of youth and Canadian track and field athletes, it's really important just to make sure that we're not only training good athletes and encouraging good academics, we're also raising good people who can have success in life, and that's going to help with the academic and athletic opportunities. And in terms of the timeline, there's not much that happens earlier than anything that you see on the screen here. But in grades 9 and 10, it's a good time to, and these notes are meant for an athlete, but I think as a coach, it's important to understand that this is what an athlete's looking at certain points. Grade 9 and 10 generally start thinking about college and university. If that's a goal of yours, start to understand the landscape, maybe create a Streamline Athletes profile so that you're recording your performances year over year and tracking your PRs. But know that active recruitment can't really start in the NCAA and doesn't usually start anywhere else until after your grade 10 season at the earliest. Once we get into grade 11, that's where these recruiting conversations begin. I'll talk more about the Streamline Athletes accounts after. Commitments can be made, but signings usually cannot. Grade 11 track and field season, I'll hit this one home. Super important. That's usually the last time that your PRs are going to be what you're recruited based on, because by the time you're in your senior high school year outdoor season, you've ideally already signed with a college or university team at that point in time, and you're locked in and ready to go. So same thing with academics, super important in grade 11. Grade 12, signing, official acceptance, academics maintain a high level of importance, and usually that's when the decision's being made. Here, a lot of stuff I've already touched on. Just in the interest of time, I'm gonna buzz over this one, and again, allow you to review it when I send the slides out afterwards. For coaches, these are the four main buckets that athletes need to be thinking about when they're in high school. What are their academic goals? So what do they want to study, for example, and do the grades they're getting in high school support those goals? Athletic goals, what do they see for themselves athletically in the future? What kind of coaches do they succeed with? And anything else that would fit into that athletic bucket. Location, where would they like to live physically? For sprinters, for example, if they're a high level Canadian sprinter, a lot of the time we hear that training outdoors year round is something that athletes are interested in, and maybe somewhere where the sun tends to be out is a little more attractive. We also hear, an 8-hour flight home for Thanksgiving is not as attractive as a couple-hour drive. So maybe looking at the schools in your backyard where the coaches know you is something that would be valuable. And then lastly, very important, is the budget. Of course, this isn't a high school or club coach's job to understand the family's financial situation in detail, but to support parents with how to communicate that with their kids can be key. And just being hyper aware that a lot of the time parents are inclined to nod and say yes and want to support everything for their son or daughter, but it can put them into challenging situations. So if you're working with kids who happen to be not from wealthy families, like most of us in Canada are not, then just be aware of the fact that walking onto a Division I program where tuition's super expensive might not be an option for everybody, and let's try and help find the best situation to not put young Canadians into debt in the future. I'll carry on from there. Academics, we get into some detail here. So maybe I'll let this one be absorbed after. I think as coaches, the most important thing that you can be doing is making sure that athletes are aware of the fact that they need to be enrolled in certain courses in grade 10, 11, and 12, that their marks are maintaining consistency or getting better every single year, and that it's really no joke when we say the classroom's important. That can equal scholarship dollars, and it can also provide a whole bunch of doors that are open that might not be. So don't slouch in the classroom. Okay, here are specific tips for high school and club coaches that I put together just for today. Again, if you have any questions, we can chat after. But some key ways to support high school student athletes with their goals. Support a healthy relationship with the sport that's conducive to thoroughly enjoying training and competing. We see a lot of athletes get to college or university, hit the first or second year and burn out because they, I don't want to say they took things too seriously in high school, but make sure they love what they're doing. I just touched on the classroom. Attainable goals with athletes, especially for grades 10 and 11. So if you have an idea of what performances they might need for certain recruitment opportunities, which we can support with here, then make sure that the athlete has a buy-in there and knows that those goals can actually relate to future opportunities for them. I use the word collaborate on this next one with the athlete and their families. When I talk to parents and guardians, in some occasions, they feel like high school coaches might be telling athletes what to do rather than collaborating with athletes and families in these situations. So if possible, try to ask questions and probe the athlete's interest versus telling them where they should be going to school. And even if you're giving advice, make sure that the athlete feels like they're in control of the situation. On that same note, encourage the athletes to be the ones communicating with college coaches. College coaches don't love hearing from helicopter parents, and maybe the high school coach or the club coach is the one who makes the introduction initially. But at a certain point, it's key for the college coaches to see that the high school athlete can schedule a meeting on their own, can pick up the phone on their own, and therefore move away from home and be a member of their program. Lastly, just understand that athletes and their families may seek out additional support in this process, and that's no black mark on you as their primary coach. One example is I spoke to a family recently who was looking for just different coaching support with a certain event because they were a multi-event athlete, and the high school coach took some offense to that, and now they need to decide this big decision in high school. That's not the goal here. The goal is for the student athlete and the family to have the best opportunity available to them. And we as a community should be supporting all of these young people the best way possible. So if an athlete comes to me and is looking for recruitment support, I know they have a high school and club coach, and I'm going to be aware of that. If you're coaching an athlete in 7 of their 10 multi-events in the decathlon, know that they might need some help for access to other facilities or a few other events, and go a long way in not stressing out an athlete while they're making their collegiate decision. This information I'll send out after as well. But Streamline Athletes, we're a platform that athletes can use. There's a free version of it, so nothing to lose by creating a free profile with us at streamlineathletes.com, which will allow athletes to contact coaches, be contacted by coaches, and have a profile that college coaches can view in one place to see all their track and field performances and academic data. There's an upgrade option that you can see on the website. It's about $20 a month Canadian. And then lastly, as I mentioned off the hop, we do one-on-one advisory, which I think the most powerful thing there is that we understand what the athlete's situation is, goals are, and where they stand in the recruiting landscape to help them focus their time on the right opportunities for them. So I'll provide the family with an action plan, and depending on what grade they're in, ideally a list of schools that they could be in touch with. I never tell them where to go. I never tell coaches to sign athletes, but it's important that we set the right expectations. Not every athlete's getting a scholarship to those 5 or 10 top D1 schools I mentioned earlier. So let's find where coaches really want you. Sign up link. My email address is here. I'll send this information out afterwards. And again, that's my phone number. So even text me if you're seeing this, 778-899-0517, or email brett@streamlineathletes.com. I'll get back to you as soon as I can, and would be happy to meet any coaches who are attending today. All right, a lot of information really quick. Thanks.
No, that was fantastic. That was, I mean, yeah, like this is the stuff we want. This is the material we want. Brett, like put your contact information in here so people have it right away. We are going to share this after. So, I mean, there was a lot of information there. I know it was a lot to digest. I know I took it in, and it does feel like a lot. And, you know, I went through the process. We all went through the process. It's a intense time for athletes at an age where we're kind of trying to make a whole lot of choices and figuring it out. And Yeah, so this was really good. Okay, so let's get right into some questions. This was awesome. So you talked about collaboration with your network, your community. What are common mistakes that we might see athletes and coaches, say typically our high school club coaches in this process working through with the athletes? Um, and how do we avoid these pitfalls? Um, I can open it up to Tony, do you want to chime in and let's get everyone talking?
Yeah, well, this time of year, for what I'm seeing from my group, especially my grade 12s, they're really panicking right now. They don't have performances necessarily when from grade 11, and other people are going on visits or getting entertained by coaches, and the reality is they just don't have the numbers that are gonna get the coach's attention from a performance perspective. So I think it's really important that you just kind of slow down a bit, because some of my top scholarships have always come very late. Christopher Morales, we went in January. So we could have gone in August to the wrong school, but I was able to convince his dad that, you know what, we're not going to send this guy just to anybody. They're not deserving. So it's really important that you don't panic, relax. And I always remember, I've read my kids that university is not age appropriate. Nobody's going to say you're 19, you're in grade 11.
No.
You're going to have 35-year-olds in your classroom. So it doesn't matter if you graduate when you're 21, 22, or 23 when you get your bachelor's, right? So don't panic. Continue to focus on training hard, keeping your grades up. And I know we're going to find you something. And that's the biggest challenge I find right now for grade 12 kids that are just in this panic. And it's also, you have to be realistic in your expectations. And I think Brett spoke to that a little bit in trying to get to Arkansas or Florida. Can you make a finals at their conference championships? Go and look at the results. It's easy to find. Most coaches are not going to sign you unless you can score points, which is top 8, right? So look at the 3-year averages of what the SEC 100-meter finals took, right? And then maybe some reality will set in, and you probably get a little bit better response from coaches if you align your performance with your expectations, right? So, like I say, the numbers never lie in track, and that's why I love the sport. It's objective. We don't give style points, and I think sometimes it's a lot easier to get a track scholarship than the others because we don't have to send footage of soccer playing or whatever, football, right? So that's just a little heads up for me.
I like that. Kurt, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think one of the things that Tony both alluded to as well as Brett was that paying attention to the grades. One of the pitfalls that we see, and I had this discussion with Tony in a text message conversation we had last week, about an athlete is not paying attention from grade 9 through 10, 11 at the true picture of what the actual student athlete looks like, and then getting to grade realizing, hey, maybe my grades aren't where they should be. And now I can't get into the school, the SEC school or whatever other school that I'm thinking about, because my grades aren't where they should be. So having a real true picture of what those grades might actually look like ahead of time, leading into grade 12.
So I would like to just add something here that Brett didn't touch on. So I didn't hear anything about the NCAA eligibility center when Brett was presenting, but you're not going on a scholarship unless you're registered with the NCAA eligibility center. And from an academic perspective, it starts at grade 9, guys. It's not waiting till grade 12 to get some super grades and then you're off to university. It doesn't work that way. They're going to look at your grade 9 English, math, science grades. So there's a lot more to getting to a Division I university than waiting to run fast in grade 11 or 12. So just ensure that you're taking the university level courses and not the college courses, because they don't recognize those.
You're pulling up a PowerPoint. Okay.
I have
something right there.
I pulled it out because I thought it might be too much detail for today. So this is from a different presentation, but if anyone wants to take a quick screenshot on the topic of eligibility,
that's key.
Super important. But yes, thanks Tony for bringing that up.
Thanks, Greg.
Yeah. It's funny because you showed me an earlier slide and that was in it. So anyways, those are fantastic points. I mean, This is it. Calming yourself. I think on so many levels, like how many times you telling your athletes this, just calm and like look at the big picture. You got this, kind of that belief in the process and all that. And you're right, grades. I mean, you said it in there, grade 9 up. Like, and I think we forget that yeah. Oh, it's just my grade 12. Well, you said it right there. It's not grade 12. The, the some of it's already done, which can be intimidating. And this, I guess, this leads into my next question, which I was going to ask. And actually, we had a question come up, so it fit perfectly. And what do we do then if I'm that kind of late, the Andre DeGrasse, right? Like comes to the show late, and what do I do now? I'm here late, and I'm now competing at a high level, and I want to get noticed. Maybe not quite Andre DeGrasse, but like let's say, in a range that all of a sudden I went from a very, medium performance. Now I'm getting noticed by a lot of things, but I'm in my grade 12 season, or very, very end of grade 11 to my 12. What can I do? How do I navigate this from here when, I should have started in 9? Any thoughts?
Well, I've had a number of kids go through the junior college system have gone on to be Olympians. Dwayne Azimato, the beauty of it as well. You're 2 years faster. Like a lot of guys are playing the NFL that I know personally. They went to junior college on purpose to develop so they could get to be a 4 or 5 star recruit. So that if you really have that passion and you think you have the talent and you want to get to a Division 1 environment, leading to a professional career in track and field, I endorse junior college as a great starting point. It's a great competition. They have some great coaches, right? And most of my junior college guys go on to that dream scholarship, the Ohio State, the USC sort of thing, because they're 2 years older and you're 2 years faster. So now you're competing against a high school kid's performance for that same scholarship spot, right? So there's nothing wrong. It's kind of looked upon to do with grades. It doesn't necessarily be a grade thing. It's a development thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And further to what Tony's saying, I think that one of the things you have to think about, because Tony has had a ton of success with the junior colleges, is making sure you do your homework on the junior college, right? Like I know Tony is scrupulous at looking at those junior colleges and developing relationships with many of those coaches and having a beat and a pulse on where to send those kids. But some of the coaches that are on this call have to develop those relationships as well and pay attention to, is that school developing talent? Do they have connections to some of those major schools that athletes could go to? That's part of it as well. Doing your homework yourself and paying attention to
Mhm.
whether or not that school has continued to produce athletes such that they are going on, or do they go to their junior college and disappear?
Mhm.
Those are things you have to pay attention to. Go back and look at the last 2 or 3 or 4 years of that junior college, and pay attention to the results and see if those kids are in Division 1 or Division 2 schools, and are they successfully competing and moving through the ranks there as well.
Yeah. I guess it can be tough because you have that initial idea of the free, right? That idea, and to really just step back a minute and just think, okay, wait, is this the best opportunity for me? Does this lead into my next goals? And if it is that JUCO setup, where do they lead into more where I can kind of get to the level that I want to get at academically or athletically? And yeah, and really kind of doing that, even in grade 12, getting that due diligence done and kind of looking. I mean, results are everywhere. So you can see that. And then, yeah. Um, okay. So question about official and unofficial visits during the recruiting process. Kind of what should athletes focus on these? And I guess first up, do you want to talk about what are the differences between official and unofficial? Does anyone want to jump in on that?
I can do that.
Yeah.
I think we do actually have an article that speaks to this on our website somewhere about official versus unofficial visits. Big difference is that the official visits are funded by the university or the college that you're visiting. Um, that's the primary difference. So
Is there a cap to the amount?
No, there's not anymore. There
Okay.
used
Oh,
Yep.
so there used to be, that was the next thing I was going to mention. There used to be a cap on how many official visits a athlete can make, which was 5.
Mhm.
There no longer is such a thing, so you can make as many official visits as you'd like. With that said, I typically don't recommend going beyond that number or too far beyond that number anyway, because I don't come across very many families that are considering upwards, like seriously considering upwards of 5 colleges and universities. That means you're going through that many official visits. You're out of the high school classroom during the week to visit that many different schools, probably. If they're a plane ride away, you're flying all the time. So even if they are covered by the school, I recommend probably 3 to 5 is a good number. 3 is probably a really smart number to keep within anyway. On official visits, there are certain rules that need to be followed. For example, official visit to an NCAA program, the athlete will not be training with the program. You might be able to see the facilities, attend a practice, and spectate. But the main thing there is that we want to avoid student athletes visiting Manhattan College, competing in their throws practice, which was over their head, getting injured, and then missing out on a recruiting opportunity at the school they were supposed to go visit the next week. So overall, I could speak about this a lot. A good example of an unofficial visit would be you live nearby to a college or university and you ask the coach if you want to swing by to their office hours and have a conversation. That would be unofficial. So if the coach invites you for a visit, probably aim to make it an official one if you can,
Mhm.
and make sure that you're not paying for your own plane tickets or hotels or anything like that to do so.
So, okay, so don't just rack up my air mile points by just going to as many as I can. No, that's good. I mean, you don't want to waste their time either. And yeah, I think that's right. You kind of narrow your focus down when you can, and then because you've already done the due diligence, right? Ideally, you've already done that, so you kind of know what's on the docket where you can do that. So then, let's assume we are there. What are the important questions I need to ask during these visits? Is there specific ones I want to talk about? To kind of really prepare me, like what should I be thinking about through the process? Uh, Kurt, do you want to jump in first?
Sure, sure. One of the things I always like to have athletes discuss with coaches when they're on visits is first and foremost about academics. Ultimately, you're a student athlete. You can't compete if you're not eligible. So, what academic supports are there? What does study hall look like? Is there supplemental support if you're a student that has a learning disability or some learning need? Um, what are the requirements for traveling and also submitting assignments, etc.? Really have coaches frame that sort of information for the students, because I think that, especially me being in education myself, those are important questions I would want to know. If I'm on the road and I'm gone from Wednesday to Sunday every single week, what does my academic schedule actually look like? And what, sort of inputs are there in order to make me be as successful as I can while
Mhm.
I'm there? I don't want to get back from a trip and know that I have 16 assignments due and I haven't had any clue, as to what really is required during that period of time. So those are the types of questions I always ask. I always tell athletes.
Tony, you got anything additional? I like that.
I aligned with everything Cord said there. But for me, and I've seen it before where it turned out really nasty, behavior. When you're with those coaches, they're looking at your behavior and your language. So, it's really important. I've had kids lose scholarships because of their language behavior. So I think Brett alluded to that earlier. You got to be on your P's and Q's when you're on those official visits with these coaches, because there's probably 10 other people that want that spot. And if they feel in any way that you're not coachable or manageable, I can guarantee you're never going to see that letter of intent. So as fast as you may think you are, and you're guaranteed a spot, if they don't think you're manageable or coachable, it's history. You're not going to have the opportunity. Just keep that in mind, and know that a lot of times you leave here and your Canadian national junior team and medal, whatever. Listen, there's 100 kids that can do that same thing in the U.S., especially, right? So keep that in mind. I'm big on behavior with my kids in my program because I know the importance of it when they get across the border to those coaches. So that's just my little bit of addition there.
Nope. You know what? Brett said the same thing. He talked about coachable athletes in this. And I think you're right. This is it. How you present yourself. This is your interview in a sense. They get to see you firsthand. You got results. We can see the results. That's an easy thing to see. And, unless you're at the very, there's a lot of athletes out there. Brett, did you want to jump in? Because you've also.
Yeah, I have a whole page of notes that I just pulled when I was recently supporting an athlete getting ready for a visit. So I'll try and keep it brief. In addition to what Tony and Kurt had said, I would encourage student athletes to view their official visit or their unofficial visit as an opportunity to get a slice of what life would be like in that particular place. So coaches might be prone to just showing you the athletic facilities and maybe introducing you to some of the teammates and telling you how a practice is run and what happens when we go on our road trips. Really cool, super important. But where will I live? What will I eat? Should I go to the dining hall and try a meal? Where will I be studying? How long is my walk across campus if I need to get from class to practice in 15 minutes? Those sorts of practical things that you might not think about until you're on campus and actually living there. And then in addition to coming up with all those questions that the student athlete should be asking, I always encourage athletes to be ready to answer questions as well. One of those that often happens is, when can you commit? Or here's your scholarship offer. And what I say to those is, be super polite, be thankful, understand that offer, but never make a decision while you're actually there on the recruiting visit. Because what happens with these kids when they're in grade 11 or 12 is they get to the campus. Oh my God, this is so cool. I did not know that anything like this could ever have existed. It is my first campus visit ever. I don't need to see anything else. Yes, I'll take that offer, coach. I can commit today. Fly home, talk to mom and dad, talk to your high school coach, sleep on it. And if you can line up another couple visits to compare that one to, great. If coaches at the colleges know that you have other visits lined up, they know that they're competing for you and they're going to give you a little bit of time and space to go on those other visits, as long as you keep the time frame reasonable. So don't jump the gun on making decisions while you're there. Ask a lot of questions, but be prepared to answer some and be polite and respectful.
Those are good ones, because that's it. It would be the very first one home. You're just so excited. You're away from home, and somebody is paying attention to me because of my performances, and you're just excited. You're just they're great, right? You meet the athletes, you meet the coaches, and everyone's around you, and it is a very cool experience. So you're right. That's a very logical thing to do, to take it back, really kind of digest what you're doing, see other things. I think that's perfect. So then what would you recommend for athletes and coaches, like to help, coaches to really help athletes manage these pressures, when they're in it, or about to be in it, when they're feeling these pressures of, okay, now I need to make my decisions. What should I do? Do you have any suggestions for coaches specifically, but then also athletes? If anyone wants to jump in, I can name someone. Tony, do you want to jump in?
I think it's important that you lay out your priorities in what you're looking for as a family for your kid in terms of a school. And that could be, as Brett alluded to earlier, location is really important because, we're speaking about America here for the sake of this conversation, right? America is significantly different, up north from down south, from east to west. So, it's not just about being in warm weather to run fast because you're a sprinter. It's, do you see, yourself raised in the GTA, going to a rural university in backcountry America? Like, It does, you know, even you hear a big name like a Clemson, the town of Clemson is a very tiny little town, but they have a big football team. Beyond that, there's nothing really there. So these are some of the things that you might want to look at and consider, you know, when looking at your priorities, your 5 priorities. And then, you know, you'd go along and maybe rate those from 1 to 5, you know, and then you figure out, you know, what's really important to you, and you kind of narrow things down from there when choosing a school, right? It's not the biggest schools are not necessarily the best towns. If you know want to go to Walmart, you know, that's fine. But there's not a lot going on there, and it is not a 1 year decision, guys. It's not a 1 year decision. I would say it's a 5 year decision, likely for a bachelor's degree. 5 years in this town, and potentially with a master's could be 7 or 8. So you want to make sure, you know, you think that this socially, because one thing that bothers me is when my athletes are away and they're not happy, and I think that comes from being, you know, a father as well. You know, it's not nice to pick up the phone and hear them, you know, not being happy. So it's a big decision that you really need to sit down and figure out. Don't let anybody rush you. You know, like I said, you can graduate university at 25. It's not a big deal. So that's a little bit of adage from me.
Yeah,
I like that. Yeah.
I think Tony, you hit it right on the head there. So I always encourage athletes in that situation, Kyle, just to go back to those 4 buckets that I mentioned during the slides: academic, athletic, location, and budget. And we use that as a framework to try and help you make the most confident decision that you possibly can in your university commitment. And what I tell athletes a lot of the time is, you know, there might be a day in your first semester where you're away for the first time in your life, and you're halfway through that semester, somewhere between September and the holiday season. It's the longest you've ever been without seeing your family. It's raining outside, practice was really hard and you pulled your hamstring, and you're behind on assignments. We want you at that point in time where things are hard to know that you made a really informed decision and you're not questioning where you are at that moment in time. Because for people who don't do the homework and don't really understand what their priorities are, they're going to think that a different college or university is going to fix those problems. It's not the case. That's going to be the situation wherever you are. So have confidence in that and go back to those 4 things. Now, as high school and club coaches, how can we support them? Again, it's not your job to tell the family what their budget is, but it's to make sure that whether they're working with us at Streamline Athletes or they're doing this on their own, they have a really good idea of what they're looking for, and they check off those boxes before they make a really big decision.
I'm going to just add on, you touched on finances. You know, we haven't talked a lot about USport in this conversation, but USport, from an academic quality of academics and finances, is a fantastic options for families that might be considering partial scholarships. And Brett touched on that, guys. You know, you got to add 40% to every dollar you spend when you go across the border. Keep that in mind. So when somebody comes at you and, you know, they're at a private school and offering you 60% and you got to pay 40, really sit down and evaluate that 40 and throw in the miscellaneous and plane tickets and everything else to go back and forth. And you might quickly find out that your best option is to go to a school in Canada where I've looked at it. It's probably 25 grand basically to live on campus, feed yourself, and tuition to go to a Canadian institution. That's change compared to a partial in the States for, you know, 30 grand that you might have to pay. So keep that in mind, you know, and that's just coming from a guy that had 3 kids in university at the same time. I didn't have to pay for 2 of them, thank God. But, you know, it can really impact a family's financial situation. And a lot of time I find it's just the idea of telling people you're in the NCAA. Well, I don't want to sacrifice my retirement for my kids' education to say they're on scholarship. So just a tidbit of advice to those parents out there: be very careful in getting involved in the partial thing, you know, and next thing you're spending, you know, upwards of $40,000 a year when you could be going to the University of Toronto for 25 grand, right?
Absolutely. And getting like quality coaching throughout here. Like that's the thing. It's just you see plenty of athletes that are very well, you know, developing very well at that Olympic level now, who have progressed through at this great rate and continued post collegiately. Like it's fantastic to see. So you're absolutely right. I mean, you gotta lay out those factors and really kind of navigate what is the best fit. Okay, so that's like half of my questions. I had another 12 to at least 12 more that I wanted to ask, but I do want to get to some audience questions. Okay, so we'll go. First one is like a spitfire one. So thinking of this, top 3 questions to ask the coach for the recruiting visit. So when you're there, think of if it's either a virtual meeting or in person, top 3 questions you want to ask them. What would you suggest? 3 questions. That's all you get. 3 questions. Tony, go.
Um, Basically, I guess I need to understand expectation in terms of competition and number of competition, what events I'm looking at running, because a lot of times, we hear about kids getting down there and just getting slaughtered. And you kind of categorize athletes. There are athletes that are going to go to school, graduate. They're not necessarily going to be Canadian national team members, but maybe, and that's fine. But if you consider yourself to be a high performance athlete heading into the system, I think it's really important to understand, what my schedule is going to look like, expectations, and how are you going to prepare me to go to the international meets in the summertime. So, I don't want to run 40 races and then expect to go to Pan Am Games, in June, because it's not going to amount. So getting an understanding of that from the athletic component is really, really important to understand their priorities of, in terms of your career and your international career, as opposed to just their NCAA requirements.
Okay, I like that. Brett.
Who are my teammates? What's your coaching philosophy? And what does a week in the life of a student athlete look like on your roster?
Woo! That was quick. I like that. All right, KD.
For me, it's what the responsibilities are during the summer. One of the things I find when student athletes have completed their year, let's say they don't make a regional championship and their season is done in, the beginning of May. Okay. What's the responsibilities or what's the requirements for the remainder of the year? Because a lot of times, some programs will provide guidance on what the athlete needs for the entire summer and send programming and everything else. And I'll have other athletes come home with nothing and they'll sit there and do nothing. They'll want to do nothing from, the beginning of May, the first week of May until August, and then go back to their schools and, they'll be in terrible shape and that sort of stuff. I think that they also need to realize if you are a student athlete, you're away at a U.S. college or a Canadian college, university, that your responsibility is also to practice and work out throughout the summer such that you can return back to, that coach and that program in decent enough shape that you can start the season healthy and ready to and be prepared to participate. So I think that that's a huge rock that a lot of times kids don't think about as they go away to university.
Okay, that makes sense. Absolutely. Okay, going through. So another question we had. So thinking about if I've, as an athlete, started late to the process, is it good to go to a US meet to compete? Would you recommend a US meet? And then if so, a specific one?
Well, we go to the US 6 times during the indoor season to compete, and primarily because we don't have a facility here that can produce really good performances on an oval. So we do travel northeast bus trips to Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania on a regular basis to seek indoor performances that might be scholarship worthy, because I just can't get that opportunity here. So I would recommend, and it's good to have your name in those results, because college coaches will never be looking at those results from some of these meets. And as far as the premier indoor meets, for me, it's the New Balance Indoor Nationals in Boston.
Yep.
It's a world-class high school meet that just kind of puts things in perspective for those kids that think they're going to get into one of those big D1s, right? Well, that guy wants to too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it can really give them a good education of what the landscape from a competition perspective is like south of the border.
And
I like that.
We're virtually the same. We see Tony at a lot of meets in addition to a lot of the other Canadian clubs. We're right next to the border, and we're Michigan, Ohio, Kentucky, just about anywhere that we can get to, in addition to the New Balance and the Nike meets. And we do it for the same reason. We want the athletes to get that landscape, but also we want them to see the same what that competition is like. And further to that, we also want them to get a look at some of the universities down there. It's an easy way for us to get them to universities and see what they're like, from a standpoint of what's the campus like. Walk it. Go and get lunch and walk the campus at, in between races. See what the facilities are like. Is this a place that you see yourself going to school? Is the campus too big? Maybe you don't want that feel and you want to be at, Western Ontario or Guelph or Toronto or, Windsor or wherever. Maybe you don't want that feel of a university that's as big as, let's say, Grand Valley or Clemson or somewhere, or, a university campus that's that big. So you need to see those to have a little bit of a reference point as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, from
That
my experience with this is a little bit different from Kurt's and Tony's because these guys are coaching high school athletes and developing them as athletes. So my view on it comes more from just a recruitment standpoint. And I get asked this question sometimes from parents, should we be traveling from Northern Alberta, wherever they are, to get into this meet so that coaches see us, so that college coaches see us? A lot of the time, my answer to that question is you want to have the best personal bests in your best events possible. And if you and your high school coach agree that the best way to achieve those performances is to compete at higher caliber meets against higher caliber competition that happen to be in the States, then I think it's a great idea. However, you don't necessarily need to travel to get your name on meet results so that coaches see them. They're not going to recruit in most cases based on if you are a top 5 finisher at X. They're going to recruit based on how fast you ran or how far you threw or how far you jumped. So the personal best is the most important athletic record, regardless of what meet that was accomplished at. However, a lot of the times going to New Balance Indoor Nationals is going to be the best way to, hit a personal best. So go for it.
It's access to facility, Brett. That's the key part, right? Particularly for sprinters, right? If you're not on that bank track like at Clemson, you're just not going to get the performance if you on a flat track, for example, right? So that's one of the motivating, or a 300-meter indoor track versus a flat 200-meter track. So we've gotten, some pretty aggressive results through that.
Yeah. Okay. That, you know what, especially it's cold here, right? Like that's it. I think you're getting some extra competition, new competition. So you're not racing the same people as well, which is also really nice. You kind of a lot of those races are just, they spit out fast and it's just go. And there's no pacing. It's go. And there's a lot to be said about that as well, which I agree. I think getting exposure to a variety of places, get your name in different areas, that is huge.
It's also from a development perspective, Kyle. We're putting kids on national junior teams going to the world championships, right? So, that's great experience for them to compete at a higher level US meets and leading into those summertime international meets. Otherwise, it's like the lights come on and there's, the deer in the headlights things, right? So it takes a time to learn to compete at that level. And that gives you the opportunity to race some of these higher caliber events.
I am cognizant of time. I'd say the audience beats me on the amount of questions that they've produced. It's quite a bit. This seems to be a very hot topic, which is fantastic. Do you have time for me to ask? Like, is that okay to stay on a couple more minutes?
Yeah.
I don't want to we allotted for an hour, but I just want to make sure before, I know it won't keep long, but we'll do is that okay?
I'm good.
Yeah. Okay. I know. Okay. So speaking of with Canadian scholarships and Canadian universities, what would be a typical scholarship in Canada? What does that look like? Academically, athletically combined, what does that look like? Kurt, yeah.
So usually in the OUA, I believe we're at 4,500 as a cap for scholarship amounts here. And that would be over the course of the year. That's the total amount that would be given to a student athlete. Keeping in mind, tuition is much cheaper here, as Tony mentioned, alluded to, than the US. So, for instance, your cost of living might be, 10 or 12, maybe 14,000 a year tuition wise, if let's say you're doing 3 semesters, plus the cost of, obviously, the residence where you're staying and or housing, and food. So as Tony mentioned, maybe it's 25 total. So if it's 25 total, that'll bring you down to 20,000. And again, not as substantial as some of the offers elsewhere, but again, that's something that might be much more manageable for student athletes. And again, I'm a product of a Canadian university. I coached at a Canadian university. We were at the time in the NAIA, and I was able to compete in the NAIA and be all American in the jumps. But there are very, very good options here. And especially across the country, tons of very, very viable options here. So that's something for kids absolutely to look at, as Tony and Brett mentioned.
Does that? Oh, okay. Sorry, that was muted. Okay, so yeah, does that sound, Brett? Would that sound about across the board?
Yep, I think that's a pretty accurate picture. I would just say there's a lot of range at
Yep.
Canadian schools. Some have scholarship budgets in their athletic department. Some don't have any scholarship budget.
Yep.
But even if they don't, the total financial picture, I call it the financial puzzle for the families to be figuring out, can be much more affordable than a partial scholarship to a US-based school. And then I'd also just mention the fact that you can still get different academic scholarships and other forms of financial aid at Canadian schools to help bring the kids down. And the other big difference is that in the United States, using an NCAA program as an example, athletes can get scholarships that cover tuition, books, housing. In Canada, no matter what, even if it's a full maxed out scholarship, it can only touch your tuition and fees. It can't touch your books, your housing, and those sorts of things. So
okay.
Don't be offended if a coach is telling you that you're going to have some out-of-pocket costs, because even if you're the best athlete in Canada and you want to stay in Canada, you're going to have some out-of-pocket costs, and that's just the way that it is.
That's good to know. That's it. Absolutely. I think even when you go to the US, it's still there's extra things that seem to add up. So no matter what, be prepared. I think, okay. Okay, I'll go one last one. So the portal system allows NCAA coaches to tap into more established and developed athletes. Does this have an effect? So I feel like it has an effect that it has affected the grade 12 recruitment, as coaches can now source out point producing athletes. How does your platform open the door for grade 11 and grade 12 athletes then in the platform to produce a new portal system?
I'm assuming are they referring to our platform at Streamline Athletes?
And
versus the transfer portal?
Yeah, I think though. Yep, that's how I would take it.
Yeah, so what our platform does is put those athletes on the map, put them in front of coaches, allow them to be contacted, and allow coaches to contact them. What we can't do is replace the transfer portal. It's still going to exist there. Coaches are going to make decisions based on that. So it does make things a little bit more challenging. I have worked with athletes recently, some of the best marks in the country, in the United States, in high school, who aren't hitting standards at the schools that they thought that they would be recruited for. And I'm not even scholarship standards. At some schools, they're not hitting the
walk-ons
that have gone up like crazy. So my advice there is to go back to the 4 buckets that we talked about earlier, understand the landscape, and know that that transfer portal is, yes, changing the way that some coaches recruit at the top programs in the NCAA Division 1. But there's hundreds more schools in the NCAA D1. There's D2 programs, there's junior college programs, there's D3 ones. And I never encourage athletes to plan a transfer. It's different if it's junior college into the NCAA. but you don't necessarily want to plan a transfer that breaks up your academics partway through. But if you're not able to check those boxes that you set out for yourself in your original recruitment goals, then let's go find the best option for you. And a lot of the time, the most successful NCAA athletes who make Olympic teams, whether that's a United States team, a Canadian team, or another international team, come out of some of those smaller programs because they weren't thrown into a pressure cooker type situation where they needed to compete for relay team space with transfers. So maybe you do become a transfer, maybe you don't. Go back to those 4 buckets, find the best opportunity for you, and take a look at the entire landscape.
Just a comment on the transfer portal, though. I think it's a great tool for the athletes in that in the old days, I remember one of my daughters was transferring, and the head coach would literally have me have to write a transfer, a release for every school she wanted to entertain. So I think it's given the athletes some of that control back. It's their life. You know, they're not pinned down to this release from a coach anymore. So if you're not happy, it doesn't mean that you cannot utilize that tool. That's what it's there for. Right?
That makes
And
sense.
one of the other things further to what Brett was mentioning, as far as transferring, being cognizant of your course load and what you're taking. A lot of times when athletes look to transfer, and this has happened to us a number of times where kids will look to transfer, but they may not have the academic program that they're looking to, to get into at the new school. Or they may say that if you are transferring, all of your credits don't transfer over as well, and you may end up having to take, an additional year. It may now move, as Tony mentioned before, from a 4-year program to a 5-year program at the new school that you're looking at, and that school may not have the academic money to sustain you for that additional year. So you may end up having to look at graduate programs or transferring again. Like those are things that you should, be cognizant of as well when you're looking at the landscape of getting into the portal or even transferring schools, right?
Yeah, a lot of the high profile signings that we see coming out of the transfer portal are for grad transfers. So these are
Okay.
That's
competed for 4 years, or maybe they've competed for 3 and they've redshirted a year and they have eligibility remaining. So we'll see those high profile athletes who are taking scholarship away from the high school recruits, but they've already been a high school recruit and they've grown as athletes and as academics through 4 or 5 years already, and now they're looking to finish out their eligibility and help a coach win a banner perhaps in their last year or 2 of eligibility. So that's another thing to think about, is that if you're not getting a full ride Division I offer out of high school, it doesn't mean that you'll never get one. It doesn't mean that you have to transfer even partway through your degree and deal with what you're to.
COVID also played a big role in that, right? Loading up that eligibility time for those kids. Some of them are like 28 years old.
Yeah.
Oh, well, this was fantastic. Thank you so much for being here. So like, let's recap. I mean, a lot of stuff to process here, but really, I mean, you've all kind of reiterated again, start early, right? Do your research, know your research throughout this. Grades matter came out multiple times. Grades matter early too. So kind of like staying in the process ahead of time. Know your buckets. Patience, right? Hear that all the time. Just calm yourself, all that stuff. Be yourself, be your best self on these trips when you're going on these recruiting trips. Like, know that you were there for a reason and kind of put your best self forward. As a coach, collaborate, support the athlete, collaborate with the whole community. And it seems like there are a lot of different options here. So really just think about it, take time. This isn't something that should be rushed. This is a time that you need to process it. This is a 4-year, 5-year post master's doctorate, absolutely 8-year pro, this could be a long commitment, which is fantastic. So really kind of sit down and take your time with this. Does that kind of sum up a little bit of what I know there's a lot here. This has been awesome. Do you have any final words before, like, Brett, thank you so much. Tony, Kurt, thank you so much for being here, sharing your knowledge, sharing your experiences through this. This is awesome. Brett, you've put your stuff in the bottom. We'll post your slides after it. They'll also be on the YouTube channel. This webinar will be available to everyone in a couple days, so it should be out there shortly. Any other things you want to say to this? Yeah, Kurt.
One thing, a great reference point for you to get an idea of what some of the actual marks are in each of the conferences, in addition to the schools, is the TFIRS website. It's the comprehensive list of all of the results for each of the teams. I'm going to put it into the webinar chat group here, and take a look at it. It has the indoor, the outdoor lists in addition to the cross-country results. Take a look at it as coaches, as athletes, because if you think that the SEC, as Tony mentioned, is for you, the SEC might not be for you as an athlete, based on looking at the last 3 years of results and seeing that, it might take 19-8 to get out of the SEC conference, and you might be a 21-4 kid at the current moment. So those are strong things to pay attention to, where you might need that extra year of development, or as Tony mentioned, maybe you need to leave in January the following year to put yourself in that type of conversation.
So one of the great things about that tool, guys, you can actually pick an athlete and track their progression from the time they got to a school till their senior year. So there's a lot of things you can do with that information just to see how the event group is progressing, with that particular coach. So if you're interested at that level, but there's a great tool. Thanks for sharing that, Kurt.
That's awesome. Yeah. Oh, Brett, you look like you were gonna talk. No, if you're gonna talk, that's fine.
I just had one final thought because it's related to it.
Give nuggets. This is what we want. That's why we're here.
If I spend time with the athlete and or parent and or their high school coach in an advisory session, which compared to what other platforms charge for that sort of advice, we super low cost. It's like, I'll do that session, you'll have schools to contact, you'll have an action plan, but that's exactly what we'll look at is given your grades and your athletic performances, here's what I know from the work that I do every day, what coaches out there are really looking for right now. And here's what I genuinely think your scholarship opportunity could look like in a best case and worst case scenario. And I often set slightly lower expectations than what I think the best case could be, so that if there's some surprises, they're super positive. So get in touch if you want to talk about that stuff. And my job is just to contextualize this recruitment process we've discussed today for one single individual. And if you have questions before we go ahead and book time with any of your athletes, my email and phone number will be sent out, and would love to chat with any coaches who attended today, especially if I've talked to you before, and especially if I haven't. So, yeah.
Well, thank you very much for your time. We very much appreciate this. Thank you so much for sharing everything. Thank you for attending. And I wish you all the best. Yeah, thank you again. Have a great night.
Thanks. Night.
Night.